everybody, this is Josh Runquist here for Heavy Debriefings, and this is the 4th episode of Backwards Marathon. For this episode, I am covering one of my favorite bands of all time, one of the bands I've been listening to more than anyone over the last several years, especially since the pandemic started, and a band who just so happens to be releasing a new album this Friday through their new home at Napalm Records. So what's a better time to do that and to be able to cash in on other people's success by being able to talk about it myself. Now, if you're not familiar with what I do at Backwards Marathon, it's what a lot of people are doing on the YouTubes where they're covering a band's discography. My original version of this was in written form, but now using the tier maker system that, again, so many metal people in the YouTube world has made better than I have. But it's time for me to continue on with this trend and try to do it in my own way. So what I like to do here is put it in chronological order, talk about every album, see how I feel about every album, and put it somewhere on the list, anywhere from, on this particular list, S through doesn't count. And of course, the person that made this particular list decided to put in the remix album, Dethroned and Uncrowned, which to me does not count because it is a remix album. So if I tackle Fear Factory in any way, yes, I will not be counting the remix albums. That's just the way I am. It is just studio albums of original music. That is how I like to do things. There is some rare exceptions, but for Catatonia, not this time around. So let's get right into it with the first album, Night of December Souls. Now, this album is completely death doom from start to finish. Of course, it has that great Peaceville sound to it of My Dying Bride, Paradise Lost, Anathema, all of those great bands, but just the Catatonia version of that. It is easily the heaviest album they've ever done for those reasons. It is an album that is severely underrated because of that as well, because it is the only album that never seemed to get that fair representation of anything that the band has done, especially since they started garnering their real recognition. And sadly, because of that, it has become underrated. But anyone who does check it out, I think they're able to find something very enjoyable about this album. Now, what am I going to do here? Am I going to put it in the grand scheme of things, of how important they are? Are they going to go by my own personal ranking? Am I going to go for in order of Catatonia albums? Well, it's kind of a mixture of the bottom two and not the first. Yes, the way I like to do this is that with Night of December Souls, it is an album that I probably go to the least amount, but every time I listen to it, I enjoy it. And I highly think it's an album that is worth checking out, but it is the one that I listen to the least. And when I go about it that way, I think I have to give it a C. The next album here is Brave Murder Day, the second album. Jonas no longer is doing screams and growls that, on this particular album, does feature them, but they are done by Opeth's own Michael Akerfeld. And this is where Catatonia really starts to get the sound that people know them for. Of course, it is still very much layered in that death doom sound, but you start to hear more of the gothic overtones, especially on this album. It starts to get a little bit lighter. It's lighter than Night of December Souls, but it's still ultra heavy, especially for what they're doing. This is another album that sadly does not get that live recognition. This and Night of December Souls never do, but the other, what I'm assuming 10 albums, of course with the new album, do get their fair representation, which is hard to blame the band, especially since they moved away from this sound. But I really think that this is the better of the two albums between Night of December Souls and Brave Murder Day. So with that in mind, I'm still going to give it a C. Now, you're probably wondering right now, hey, why is Night of December Souls ahead of Brave Murder Day? Well, I'm going to fix it up at the end, so no worries. Next up is the album where the band really started coming into their own, and they really found the sound that they were going to be going after with Discouraged Ones. With Discouraged Ones, it starts to get a lot lighter. It's still heavy in its own way, but it is one of the lightest things that they've done. It has more of that gothic rock, alternative rock sound to it, still metal, but you can really tell that the band has moved away from the Death Doom sound by this time, and it is something that I feel really needed to happen as well, because as great as they are doing Death Doom, they're so much better what they became. And this is a great example of that. I mean, from the opening sounds on here, I mean, you can just hear everything that the band is going for, and they are going in the right direction. Now, this is another one that I feel deserves that C ranking. And again, I honestly don't think anything's ever going to be in the D or F for this. But yeah, I think it is an album that qualifies for being in a C. Next up, we have the fourth album, and where the band truly found what they were looking for with Tonight's Decision. This starts to have some of the most classic songs from Catatonia's catalog. I mean, For My Demons is easily one of my favorite Catatonia songs. This whole album continues more discovering what they want to accomplish in the gothic sound, and it experiments more with the alternative side, the goth rock side, and it's very smooth listening, especially when you compare the previous albums. This is the smoothest one up to this point. You start to see more of these songs that are featured into the setlist to great appreciation, and it is pretty much from this part of the catalog where you really start to see everything come through. It sounds more focused, it sounds more alive, which is crazy to think about because, with just how sad Catatonia is. But it's great to be able to see that from the band, and you can just tell that they're really moving in a direction that they were happy to make. And with that in mind, I'm actually going to give this one a B. Next up is actually my favorite Catatonia album. I don't hear that enough from a lot of people, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's in my personal life, whether it's on social media. It is Last Fair Deal Gone Down. This is probably the most experimental album from Catatonia, and I say that even with City Burials being such an experimental album for the band. I still think The Last Fair Deal Gone Down is the most experimental for the fact that it goes from nearly pop rock to almost doom metal and everything in between, still with that great gothic overtone and very depressing sound that they are known for. Some of my favorite songs happen to make it onto this album: Tear Gas, Tonight's Music, Sweet Nurse, which I feel is a very underrated song. We Must Bury You is either one of the most loved songs or one of the most hated songs in the band's catalog. I let you decide that for yourself. I happen to enjoy it because I love the entire album from start to finish. But yeah, this is where the band threw pretty much everything against the wall and wanted to see what would stick. For me personally, everything stuck on this album, and it is fantastic. So with that in mind, yes, I'm giving it an S. Next up is the band's so far only concept album, Viva Emptiness. Now, if you happen to have seen the original Backwards Marathon that I did for Catatonia, you will have seen that I put Viva Emptiness near the bottom of the list, if not at the bottom. I was really torn between it. But over the years, I've really grown to appreciate this album. The more that I studied the story of everything that's going on, mob crime and deception and murder and everything that goes on with it, and the more that you just sit down and appreciate it for what it is a fantastic album. I don't think it's their best, but I don't think it's their worst either anymore. It does seem like it's the kind of album that kind of broke the band, in a sense, because this was another one where they were still very much experimenting with the gothic rock sound, the alternative rock sound, and this is the last album up until City Burials where you really start to hear that again. And I'm trying to figure out the right way to say it because, again, I've really grown to appreciate this album. Very much so. But also, at the same time, I can understand why only a couple songs really seem to end up on the setlist nowadays, and there's a reason why they did a remix of the album for their 10th anniversary, because they were not happy with the way it came out originally. But all of that aside, an album that I used to give a D, am gonna bump up to a C. Next up is where pretty much Catatonia hit their stride and continued that on for at least the next couple albums, if not the rest of their career so far, depending on how you look at it, with The Great Cold Distance. This album is one of the greatest things that they were able to accomplish. It still has a little bit of that alternative rock sound, but they started to incorporate more of the metal sound, and they realized that they could be metal, they could be progressive metal, they could be able to accomplish all of these great heavy moments without having to incorporate screams and growls. And you start to hear some moments of kind of bands like Meshuggah or Tool or any kind of inspiration with that down tuning. But also, at the same time, they were able to craft their own sound. And you have legendary songs on here. I mean, like, My Twin is probably the most famous Catatonia song, and for great reason. It is a heartbreaking song, and a reason why so many people discovered the band in the first place. And it's an album that is near and dear to me. I discovered Catatonia right around this time as well, and I'm always going to love it. And with that, I am, in fact, giving this album an A. Next up is Night is the New Day, which is pretty much right on par with The Great Cold Distance, but actually heavier. This is the heavier of the two albums. I mean, you can tell that from the opening seconds of the song Forsaker, which opens the album, and you can hear that great kind of Meshuggah sound going on. I mean, strip back Meshuggah, but you know, it's got the great it's hard not to headbang to that, and with me being a drummer, or at least I used to be, it's impossible not to be able to drum along with that. And yeah, just the whole album is just full of great hooks, great choruses, fantastic production. This is a seminal album, and really between The Great Cold Distance and Night is the New Day, I mean, you can't go wrong. These are probably the two albums that I think people would recommend to you more than anything. Although, in my humblest of opinion, this tier list of mine is not about necessarily what are the overall greatest and most famous albums from start to finish. This is my personal ranking. And with that in mind, just like I said, it's right on par with The Great Cold Distance, and I have to give this album an A. Dead End Kings is next, and I do feel like this is the album where they started to feel a little more comfortable with the sound that they were incorporating in, and I don't want to say that they were resting on their laurels. I'm also not going to say they weren't resting on their laurels with this album either, because it is, between this 4-album stretch, I do feel like this might be the weakest of all 4 of them, but that's just my humblest of opinions. And even with that said, it is still fantastic. But it is the kind of album where, if you do check out Night is the New Day, if you do check out The Great Cold Distance, if you do check out Dead End Kings, I would honestly say you should probably check out The Fall of Hearts before you check out Dead End Kings, but that's just my thoughts on it. And with that in mind, I think I am, in fact, going to give this album a B. And since I did bring it up, I might as well go with the next album in this 4-album stretch, which most people consider to be the best of Catatonia. It is, in fact, The Fall of Hearts. So, with that in mind, this is the album where you can tell the band kind of needed a break from this sound. I do feel like they were able to accomplish so much on this. It's so great. It's so proggy. I love the production on this album. I love how it can get heavy. It's got some great haunting keyboards going on behind it. There's so many great things that are going on with it, but it also does kind of feel like the point in their sound where they realized that they needed to steal an In Flames reference, reroute to remain. And this is a great final album to be able to show off that side. And it is one of those albums that really does just hit the mark perfectly for the sound that they were trying to accomplish in a farewell to this chapter of Catatonia. So thinking about that as well, I am going to give this album a B. Next up, we have what might be the most controversial Catatonia album. I say that with a question mark, because it kinda is, but it kinda isn't at the same time. Let me explain. City Burials comes back after the band took a couple-year break. And by that, I mean the band didn't break up, they just decided to not record and not tour for a year or two. They just needed some time off, and I think it really benefited them for that reason. The album does have a lot of great Catatonia moments that you know and love, but it does also incorporate some more electronic moments, which you don't necessarily expect at this period of time in Catatonia. The reason for that is a lot of the songs that ended up on this album were originally going to be on Jonas's solo album, but then he decided, with the rest of the band, that these songs were strong enough to be a part of Catatonia, so they decided to go that route instead. For some people, that was a great decision and a great new chapter for the band. For other people, they feel like this should have just been a Jonas solo thing, and they should have just kept more to a traditional sound. And what is that traditional sound? Is it Death Doom? Is it the alternative era? Is it the goth era? Is it the progressive era? Who is to say? But for me, this is the album I probably listened to the second least, and it's only because it came out in a time that was kind of bad for me. I didn't get to give this album the amount of love that I should, and it would probably change once I do give it a little more love, and I feel like I'm going to do that at some point. But until then, I think I do have to give this album a C. But also, while I'm looking at this, I think I do need to raise Viva Emptiness up to a B, because that just feels more natural. And finally, it is time to talk about the brand new album from Katatonia, Sky, Void of Stars, which comes out now through Napalm Records this Friday, if you're watching this as I'm releasing it. And this album, well, if you listen to the singles, you think that they're going back into the trajectory of that classic 4-album stretch from The Great Cold Distance all the way through The Fall of Hearts, which it is not. If I had to compare this to something, I think it is the 2020s version of Last Fair Deal Gone Down. I do feel this is a very experimental album. There's a lot more electronics that you heard on City Burials. There's a lot of great popular alternative moments that you would hear on Last Fair Deal Gone Down. There's a lot of great heavy moments that you would hear in that 4-album stretch that I keep talking about. There's a lot to enjoy about this. It kind of feels like a rejuvenated Catatonia on this album. They know the direction that they want to go in with this chapter of the band. And what is in that chapter? Everything except for the first 2 albums. So if you want a little bit of that variety of everything that Catatonia is about, with the gothic side, the alternative side, the electronic side, the proggy side, the metal side, you get all of that in strides throughout this album. And yeah, I'll say it again, this is a modern day Last Fair Deal Gone Down. Now, I haven't had the album long enough to be able to officially give this an S tier, and I think a lot of people would give me crap if I decided to do that. So, I'm going to be fair to everybody and give this an A. Now, give me a couple seconds as I rearrange these to make sure that they're in the order that I personally want them to be in. We'll be right back in a second. And we're back, everybody. And as you can see here, I have everything in order, so let's go from the bottom. Now we're here up to S rank. Sorry for that reference. I do that for some weird reason. Anyways, again, it doesn't count Dethroned and Uncrowned because it is a remix album. I am a stickler for that. But going from the bottom, we have City Burials, we have Night of December Souls, we have Discouraged Ones, and topping off the C rank, we have Brave Murder Day. Then, for the B tier, we have Viva Emptiness, Tonight's Decision, The Fall of Hearts, and Dead End Kings. In the A rank, Night is the New Day, and topping off the A rank is The Great Cold Distance. And on S rank, again, my personal favorite album. Maybe you'll agree, maybe you'll disagree, but for me, it's the one that hits the meter the most. In the S rank, in the lone spot, we have Catatonia's Last Fair Deal Gone Down. Thank you so very much for tuning in, and my welcome back show for Backwards Marathon, and my first true video of 2023. Unless you count my Twilight Force interview, which went up last week, which I was not planning, but it happened, and I'm thankful for it. If you agree, disagree, any of that stuff, feel free to say something down below if you choose to. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. I shouldn't have to say that, and if you don't want to, you don't have to. But if you want more content like this, where I will get stronger with this, again, I took roughly a month off trying to heal myself up and recharge my batteries, so I'm a little uneven on this one, but I did want to get this one out for the week in which Sky Void of Stars comes out, and I hope you will enjoy that album. And if you've never checked out Catatonia before, you're a lifelong Catatonia fan, or you just think they're okay, maybe you'll give some of these albums a chance, a spin, a re-listen, and see what you think of them. And until the next Backwards Marathon interview, or anything else that I have going on, this is Josh Ronquist for Heavy Debriefing saying, see ya.